Welcome to Come and See, your podcast for finding truth in a world of chaos. Brought to you by All for Jesus Living Waters Ministry. With host and founder Richard Case and co-host and retreat leader Kathy Ricconi. Today is our special guest day, where we will hear from a friend of the ministry who will share their insight and stories on truth in this chaotic world. And now your host, Richard Case.
Well, good morning, Kathy. It's Guest Thursday, and we have a special guest, Brad and Keri Little from McKinney, Texas.
Excited to have you guys on. Have a little Southerners on here too.
Welcome you guys. They're friends of Bob and Keri Rockwell, who are leaders in our ministry, and so we're excited to hear their story. We had a little technical issue last week. We actually tried to record you guys. And what happened? Tell the audience what happened. You had a little issue.
Yeah, our internet provider, which is Spectrum, which has been great, 99% of the time, shut down in the middle of right after we got started, and It was a area-wide disruption that was out for about 3 or 4 hours. So it was not meant to be.
So I'm convinced that you have something really good to say, that God is just going to use this podcast to bless other people, and that was a little bit of interference.
That's right.
That's all.
That's right. God said no. So how did you survive without 3 hours of internet?
We went and had lunch with Bob and Keri.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Oh, how fun!
Right.
That's
good.
great.
You mean you actually talked to each other, huh?
Yeah.
Didn't need a Zoom call or anything else.
That's so fun.
Yeah, we did that person-to-person thing,
That person-to-person, man, that's strange these days.
Yeah.
Well, we're excited. First of all, again, we'd like for you to share how each of you, and you had really interesting stories about this. How did you each come to know Christ?
You want to go?
Sure.
Okay.
I came to the Lord very young, about 6 years old. My dad had passed away, and my aunt and uncle would come and take me to church, and we had an Avon lady that would come and spend time with my mom every week, and she got to be there more and more often, and she's the one that led my mom to the Lord, and her husband became a pastor shortly after that, and we started going to church there. And my new dad, my stepdad, my mom married shortly after my father had passed away. She had 2 small children at home, and he was an agnostic. And about 3 years later, I got to watch him get saved and filled with the Holy Spirit.
Oh, how cool!
And it was amazing.
Wow. Where was this at? You were growing up?
Oklahoma City.
Dale
City, Oklahoma. Yeah.
Yep. Okay. And how old were you when you were young then, right?
When I saw my dad get saved?
Yeah, and when you
was 9.
you became 9 years old, yeah.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah. I'd gotten up in the middle of the night to get something, and I remember walking down the stairs, and I heard him in the living room pacing around the floor, praying. He's praying, and he was praying in the Holy Spirit. And so a complete change from who he was.
Wow.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Wow, that's
That's
amazing.
beautiful.
That's beautiful. Brad, how about you?
My parents got divorced when I was 6 months old. I was unexpected. My brother is 14 years older than me, so I was not planned. And so it was my mom and I for obviously a long time, but I grew up I only knew the church. I did not have a life outside of the church. My mom and I had a church. Her 2 sisters, my aunts, had a church in another small town. My godparents, who lived across the street from us, who watched me when she worked, had another church. So I was in one of those 3 churches, if not all 3 churches, every week, all 3 vacation Bible schools, church on Sunday night, church on Wednesday night, all those small churches, all the fun things that go with it. And so I guess God knew I needed 24/7 protection.
That's awesome. I love that.
In my aunt's church, my cousin was a pastor. And so during one of the vacation Bible schools, there were several of us, but he baptized me, and I was about 6. And I still remember it. I mean, it's one of those moments. People say, how do you remember something when you're 6? I don't know the answer to how you remember it, but I do remember him baptizing me in the river. And I remember going to my aunt's house after it was over and I kept saying, so the devil can't get me now. So the devil can't get me now. That's really all I cared about at that time, because that's all I could comprehend. And then at my mom and I's church, when I was probably 13, 14, I rededicated my life. And that's when I really knew and understood the relationship with Christ. And I knew that that's what I needed, for one, but also wanted it. So that's really when I consider that my walk began.
How old were you then again?
13, 14. Yeah. So that was a church, at the time everybody was Baptist back in Eastern Oklahoma, but sometimes you would get scared into heaven. I didn't get scared into heaven as a child, but maybe I got scared into walking with the Lord. So that was fun, but definitely appreciative of all the people who had influence in my life.
Yeah. Yeah. And
yeah. It's funny as you talk about that, I'm reminded, I hear a lot of stories, especially I grew up in the South too. I don't know if you knew that, but I grew up in Memphis. And so it's not uncommon when you've grown up in the church to kind of have that almost like a twofold story of, this is when I understood salvation by Jesus, but
Right.
This is when I kind of had my own crisis of faith and understood lordship, and I wanted relationship with him. And I think that's really what you're describing. And so often that comes in that age you're talking about. It's really kind of those middle school years where you're defining, is my faith what everybody else has told me it is, or is it my own?
Right.
And stepping into that. So it's beautiful.
Yeah, that's right. So you're both from Oklahoma, and how did you then get together? I think it's probably you were in Oklahoma, right, when you got together. How did that happen? How did you meet each other? What attracted you to each other, and how did you decide to get married?
You want Keri's version or the truth?
Yeah. I'd rather have Keri's version. I think it's going to be more interesting.
It's funny how we don't remember the same things, but do you want me to go?
Go first.
Okay, so it requires a little background. So she was actually a widow and I was a widower. We didn't know each other at the time. So I had been married for 23 and a half years and actually dated my first wife before that. We met in college, and so had a great life, great 3 kids. Everybody was healthy. My mother-in-law lived 2 streets over. So it was literally what you would hope for. Great home, everything. And then my first wife, had been a long distance runner in high school, and she continued jogging even as an adult. And we knew that she'd had stress fractures in both hips, which is not uncommon for young girls to develop throughout their teenage years if they literally do cross country. What we didn't know is that she had developed a blood clot on her left hip, until that one morning when I was actually just getting ready to get up to go to work, and our youngest daughter came running in and said, Dad, you need to come check on Mom. And went out there, and this is where it kind of gets surreal, but I thought she was having a seizure because she was speaking, but it wasn't the normal speaking. So it lasted for maybe 10, 15 seconds, enough for me to call 911 because I knew this was not normal. And then she snapped out of it, and she said, I just want to go lay down. And I said, well, honey, I already called for the ambulance. Let's go in the front room so that when they walk in, you're right there. And so we actually walked in, and she sat on the couch, and then she leaned over. And that's when I saw the ambulance pull up, but it's also at the same time I saw her turning gray. And so I knew this was serious, but even at the time, I didn't think, this happens. They come get you, they go to the hospital, and everything's going to be okay at some point. I do remember the ambulance driver looking at me, and he said, Brad, you need to come, but don't try to keep up with us. You just take your time and get to the hospital. So, I'm on the way to the hospital. My oldest daughter at the time is in college, a sophomore. My middle son was a senior in high school, and my youngest daughter was a sophomore in high school. And so we start the phone calling, and then calling her mom, and calling her she has a twin sister whose name is Keri, by the way. But so we start making the calls, and we all get to the hospital, and when the doctor came in and said, we've revived her 3 or 4 times, but this is going to be a long haul. And I said, well, can I go see her? And so my sister-in-law And I walked down there and saw them working on her, which I'd never, again, we were very sheltered life, hadn't had any, even relatives have any issues. But I remember seeing them work on her, and I literally just fell to my knees. And I told my sister-in-law, I said, our life has just changed. Because you could tell it was not going to be good. And so she passed away. And, hard time for the family, for sure. The hardest time obviously I'd lost my wife, which, is hard. The hardest part was also my kids, watching them grieve over losing their mother. And it was really hard for me because I'd grown up to be that protector. I fix it, don't mess with my kids, mess with my family, I'll fix it. And I couldn't fix it. And, we all came home that night that it happened, laid on the living room floor together and just cried all night. And did that for a couple of nights, actually, before my son, we were on the third or fourth day, and we're sitting there, and he goes, Dad, can we all sleep in our own beds tonight? And I was like, okay, this is the beginning of healing. So yes, we can all sleep in our own beds. And so we went through that. And then it was, I don't know how long, I would tell people there's a difference between being lonely and being alone. Typically, if you're lonely, you can fix that. If you're alone, you may not be able to fix that. And so it was many months later, and I had my oldest daughter and my mother-in-law, and I met with them at our house. And I said, I'm asking your permission to start dating again, because I am not a good version of myself alone. I need that other person in my life. So they were both like, yes. Like, I think they'd been waiting on me to say that. And my mother-in-law at the time, my ex-wife, my deceased wife, she's like, Brad, you're too young to live the rest of your life alone. So with their blessing, I started dating. And I will also tell you that dating the second time around after a 25-year respite, it was nothing like, well, when I'd never imagined it.
Well, you started getting letters.
Yeah,
and
it was really
showing up.
It was really weird. I got letters from women the week after the funeral. The week after the funeral, and I'm letting my kids read these letters and from these women, and because I wanted them to see how bizarre it was. And
the kids were older; they weren't like
they were college. So I was letting them see this because we were all experiencing this. Like they were going through this with me, but separately also through their own mourning. But I was not ready for the dating world. It was bizarre, to be honest. And, at first you're like, okay, it's bizarre, I'm going to enjoy it. And then there's no enjoyment. And after a while, I really was convinced I would never have what I had before. And so I was very thankful, honestly, but I was for everything. But I was in my bedroom one night crying, praying to God and crying and like, what I have to do. And my fraternity little brother called me, who was very close to me. And he said, what are you doing? And I said, well, I'm glad you asked. I'm sitting here praying and crying. And so he just took over and we prayed for 30 minutes. And it just brought peace to my soul. And so went to bed, got up the next day, went back out to work. I owned my business at that point, and one of my managers looked at me and said, hey, have you ever met this girl named Keri Kennedy? I said, no. He goes, well, she's got a story very similar to yours. And so I was like, well, okay, let's meet. And so I knew of her vaguely, like I had seen her, but I didn't know her at all. And so, I manned up and I texted her.
And where was this, by the way? What city was this in?
We were still in the Oklahoma City area at the time. I lived in Norman. My family lived in Norman, and Keri was in Del City, Oklahoma City. So that's my lead up to how we met. Now your turn.
So even though I'd gotten saved at a young age and stayed in church and all that, I made some really decisions that I wished I hadn't made. I got married at a very young age. I got married at 16, first time. And it was not, we both had grown up in church, but it was it was an abusive marriage in a lot of different ways. So we stayed married almost 10 years because I grew up in church, and if you were praying and doing the things you were supposed to be doing, then it would change and things would get better and the abuse would stop. And that was my thinking, right or wrong at that time. I know now that's not right, but at that time, I thought that's what I was supposed to do. We had 4 boys. And so about 6 months before our 10-year anniversary, I left him for another man and had my daughter. And so when you're hurting, you don't go to somebody that's healthy. You go to somebody, a lot of times it's even worse than the first. So I married an alcoholic that was quite a bit older than me. About 5 years after we got married, he committed suicide. So I decided, and during this whole time, I'm still going to church and still praying, and just, I really was trying to figure out how to get to where God wanted me to be and raise my kids the right way. But I knew that in this process, my kids, I did not want them to grow up thinking that this was marriage and this was what God wanted for them. And so after he passed away, after he killed himself, the kids and I kind of separated ourselves from a lot of things. It was basically just us. We lived in a very small town. We lived in a very small town, probably 30,000 people at that time, not in Oklahoma City area. And we didn't have any family around. It was just us. His family kind of blamed me for the suicide, but they had to have somebody to blame. That's how they dealt with it.
Yeah.
And so that's what I explained to my kids. That's just how they dealt with the death. And so that was okay. So my pastor at the time told me, don't make any major decisions. Don't move for 3 years and don't date for a year. So I listened to him on the not moving. Maybe it hadn't sunk in yet. So, but it didn't take long for that to sink in. Finally, we had moved closer to my parents, about an hour and a half from where we were. And I told God one day, I said, I want somebody to spend my life with, but I don't want to get married just to have somebody and just to be married. So I wanted to become the person that I needed to be for God to bring that person to me. So I was single for 8.5 years. So I guess it took me a long time to fix some things that needed fixed. I remember I had this book called You're a Christian and Divorced, Now What? And I had gotten it right after my first husband and I had gotten divorced, but never read it. Pulled it out after, because you go through a lot of shame and a lot of condemnation.
Yep.
And it's hard to deal with and hard to get through when you don't have anybody. I mean, I had the Holy Spirit, I had the Lord walking through it with me, but I had these 5 kids that I needed to set a different example for. And I wanted my daughter to know that she was worth more. And I didn't see myself as worth much more. I had my mom tell me about 6.5 years into this, you should just settle and just marry some guy I had grown up next door to, because he likes you and he loves the kids, and you should just settle. You've been through a lot. And I said, Mom, that's not fair to him. I don't love him. And that's just not fair to him. I asked her, I said, would you tell my younger sister that? And she goes, well, no, but she doesn't have the baggage you have. I said, well, I love you, but I'm not doing that.
Yeah,
that's just, that's not what God has for me. So I made a list of 50 things I wanted in a man. And I prayed, but these were things I prayed about. It wasn't superficial things. I wanted somebody that tithed. I wanted somebody that would love my kids like they love theirs. I wanted somebody that was a Christian but knew how to have fun. I guess my words could be a good boy but knew how to be bad. And loved to travel, different things like that. So I had owned a business while I was married to my second husband, and got rid of it, gave it back to the person I bought it from right after the death. And I was getting ready to open it up again. My best friend called me. Her husband wanted me to come work for them and do their marketing. So I said, sure, I'll do that, instead of opening up my business again. And after about a year of doing the marketing and the PR, I was kind of bored. And I said, I really want to learn the inside of the restaurant. And she told me I was nuts. But I said, well, I don't know how to explain. I just really want to learn. So in the process of this, the chamber started coming in. And this is kind of where our stories differ just a little bit on how I remember things and how he remembers things. But the chamber would come in. I was very shy, but very standoffish, because usually the men that would ask me out were either married, really old, or really young. And I knew that none of that was where I needed to be. Not by really old, they were not my age, they were just older. And I'd done that already. And anyway, so I feel like I'm rambling a little bit, sorry.
But bringing back memories for me.
No, it's good.
No, I love hearing the details.
But the chamber, they would come in with this crew, and
I was in the chamber, so I was in that group.
He was,
okay.
And they would want me to speak in front of them, and I was very shy, but I guess, and I had no idea until later that it came across as being stuck up. Brad told me later that he thought I was extremely stuck up, and I said, well, no, I was just really shy. And a lady, one of the ladies in the chamber had sent me a message. She had found a picture of me on Facebook and asked me if she could send it to this guy, Brad Little, that owned this business in Norman. And I said, well, sure. But she told me a little bit about him at first. And I said, okay, I trust you. And I didn't know the other gentleman had been talking to Brad about meeting me. Well, both of them, not knowing, had each been talking to him.
Oh, funny.
And so
yeah, so the buddy of mine, he said, well, let's go to her restaurant, you can meet her. And I said, okay. So we met there, and she was there, she was working, and his name was Scott. Scott and I were I don't remember if we were at a table or
you were at a bistro type
table, and all of a sudden Keri brings in these cheese sticks for Scott. And so, which Scott didn't order, but so we're sitting there, and then she just kind of said hi to him, and then maybe said hi to me. I can't remember, but then she left. I said, she's obviously not interested, Scott. And he goes, no, she is, blah, blah, blah. And we talked some more.
But Scott had never told me he was telling. Right? So
we left, and then he said, okay, this is days later. He goes, okay, let's go back. She is interested. She's just very shy. And I go, shy? I'm not sure she's shy, but so we go back, and here come these cheese sticks again that neither of us ordered. So I guess this was a way of Keri's offering the bread, but so we had cheese sticks, and then we talked a little bit at that time, not much.
You and I?
Just briefly. I mean, you stood at the table a little bit longer, but yeah, it wasn't deep or anything. So I was really kind of unsure because up till this point, even though, again, I'd prayed, and the next day, Scott said, have you met Keri Kennedy? So I thought, okay, this is more than a coincidence. It wasn't a smooth start. So I wasn't gonna say it was from God or it wasn't from God. I was just, I had been through so much bizarreness on dates. You meet middle-aged women, and for like the first hour, all you hear, why they're divorced. I mean, and you're like, I understand why you're divorced. I mean, I don't want to. So Keri made her list. I also had a list. I knew I realized, when you date and get married in your 20s, you have a blank slate for life. It's not filled in. Most of it, very little of it's filled in. And so when you're doing this again in your 40s, for you and the person you're dating, it's filled in to a great extent. It is what it is, and there's not probably going to be much to change what's on that board or the trajectory of the board. So my prayer was, I'm probably going to find someone who's divorced, Father. I just want someone who doesn't argue with her ex. There's no issues with the ex. There's no fight over kids. I don't want any drama in my life because I've never had it. And so I was convinced I would probably marry someone who was divorced. I mean, the chance if they were single in their 40s, there's a reason probably that they're single. So anyway, like I said, I texted her finally, because she'd heard some things about me, and obviously I heard some things about her, but
well, I had at one of the chamber events, I'd asked one of the other ladies that didn't know him, which I didn't realize that. But I said, what is up with that man? What is up with him? And she says, oh, Brad, he just lost his wife. And I said, oh, how long ago? And she said 13 months or something. I said, never mind, it's too soon. It's really cute, but never mind. She goes, yeah, he's kind of in a player mode. She didn't know him from Adam.
Oh boy, it's jumping. But so actually, during dating, this one lady, who I was actually kind of interested in, she called and we were talking, and I started crying. As you can see, even now, 14 years later, the emotion is still there because, you know, Keri's been very good. The lady said, I started crying. She goes, you're not ready. And I said, you know, I don't know when I'll be ready, if I'll ever be ready. I don't know, but obviously you're not the one for me. So I really cut it off. And so the good thing about Keri, the good thing about God, Keri had been through a similar situation and she'd lost her dad. So she was able to help me heal because, you know, we talked and I said, you know, I never fell out of love with my first wife. This was not a situation where the marriage crumbled and we hated each other and we got divorced. It was over. Like, you know, there was never a falling out of love. So it was a hard part of getting over the mourning part of it. And so, you know, as I got to know Keri, she was able to walk with me and help me heal. She'd been down that road 8 years prior. And so God really brought us together.
So one of our first, after we had gone out a couple of times, and you can tell me, I got to go meet his late wife's mother and fell in love with her. So that, to me, the way she treated him and loved him and the way he was with their family was extremely attractive to me. And it told me a lot, among other things that happened, told me a lot about his heart. Mm-hmm. And it to me, it was, I didn't want him to not love his first wife, because it said so much to me about him that he could share that with me and share the memories with me. And then they would invite me over for Christmas and holidays. And we spent, for the first several years, we spent every holiday with them.
Wow.
And, you know, for somebody to have that much love and grace to accept me and my 5 kids into their home, that was huge for me.
Yeah, it was, you know, and I tell people so I don't want to knock dating for those that are going through dating, but some really weird situations. Women were just different. But so went out with Keri the very first time, and I did take her to see my oldest daughter, who was palming at the University of Oklahoma. So she's down at a basketball game, and she's down there. And she told me later, she said, Dad, I used to, when you would sit in the stands by yourself, I would turn around so you couldn't see me cry. Mm.
Oh.
So she was so happy. Because Keri was the first one I really brought to the public eye. And so on our first date, so we go to the game, we go to
Charleston,
a restaurant to eat. And I said, so we're sitting there and I'm like, at this point, I'm like, just ask me anything you want to ask me.
Did you have cheese sticks?
I don't remember exactly. I do remember thinking, okay, I'm going to hit it head on. Ask me anything you want to ask me right now. Just whatever. You can ask me anything. And she said, do you tithe? And I was like, thank you, Lord. Because no one had asked a question that deep. It was all like, oh, I've seen you at the gym, or, I mean, just stuff that you're just like, seriously. That's why I was convinced I would never have what I have. So, you know, we've actually started trying to write a book about how we met and life after. My side is called One Life, Two Soulmates, because God has been very good. Anyway.
So our kids.
So now we have 8 kids and 18 grandkids.
Yeah. And it was we had very high looking back, we had extremely high expectations of our kids. We just had this white picket fairy tale thing that they would just come together as quickly as we did, and they would all mesh and everybody would just fall in love with each other. And they tried really hard to live up to that. My kids had 8.5 years to process and to deal with things. And so when we got married, we still had 5 kids in the house, and several were out and gone doing their own things. And they, they really handled things so well. But I can remember we moved in to the house that they had lived in, and I would suggest don't do that.
Yeah.
Because,
so when I had a decision to make, and like, do I sell the house? But there was part of me, I guess the majority of me, that said, well, my kids have just had their world turned upside down.
Yeah.
So if we move, that's even more unsettling for them.
Right.
So I made the decision to not sell the house. But looking back, it was asking a lot and probably not fair of Keri to come into our house. My kids knew, I told them, we had a lot of talks. I said, look, you've never seen me date. And so, when I met your mom, and you weren't around to see how we hugged and kissed and held hands. So all of what you're seeing now with another woman is going to be very strange for you. And I get it. And you may even resent it at times.
and they did.
And they did and they didn't.
Yeah.
And then they did and then they didn't. I mean, it was hard.
Well, they were going through their own healing process
They were.
still.
They thought they were ready to see Dad move on because they wanted to see him happy. Katie is Brad's youngest, and she would come in and it would break her heart because she would see her dad all by himself watching TV and on his bed just watching TV. And it would just break her heart. So she thought Courtney was away at college, John's away at college, and they just all thought they were ready for it. And they weren't. They were, but they weren't. So here I am moving into their mom's home, their mom's bedroom, cooking in their mom's kitchen, doing, so every time, and Katie's still living in this house. So every time Katie walks in from school, here's this other woman.
Yeah,
and
sure.
So she's dealing with all these feelings. And so she had just gotten her driver's license, and then she's got prom and all these things. She's looking at me, and she's not meaning to, but she's looking at me. She's like, one more door slammed. That means my mom's gone. One more thing's happening. My mom is gone. So each time there's this big process happening in life, I'm there in her home and her mom's not.
Yeah.
So I do think it would have been easier to have not started out in the home. And then my kids they wanted to have a place to call their own also, but it was hard for all of them. And they did great. My youngest son and Brad's youngest daughter became inseparable from the moment they met. They were like best friends, little brother, big sister. They actually are a lot alike.
And today we all get along. I mean, it was,
we did then.
Yeah, we did then. I had to explain to my kids, I'm not marrying Keri to be your mom. Your mom, you had a mom. We will love your mom till we all are with her again. But Keri's being married. I'm marrying Keri to be my wife. And there's a difference.
Yeah, that's right.
And so they get it now. I mean, honestly, 12 plus years in, they love Keri now. They tell her they love her all the time. I mean, it was an evolution for them as for a family. And God has been good all the way through it. God has been so good all the way through it. So 30 minutes later, that's how we met.
Beautiful. Well, that's what a wonderful story. And actually, because it's certainly interesting how you came together and all the beautiful detail and the complications, so to speak, of that. It's a little different than other people have shared. Theirs has been a lot simpler. So it's a good thing. So I think because we're at the end of our time on this session, if we could have you back actually even shortly, are you able to do another session with us?
We do a part 2 real quick.
We could do a part 2. So we would love to hear more now about how do you guys walk together in Christ and what has that meant, including it sounds like your children have also through it all have learned healing and life and moving forward and going with God's plan. So we'll talk about that. So we're so appreciative of you sharing that depth. It's really important to do that and to have us understand what you've been through and how that came together. And the beautiful redemption of God. I mean, it's really it's really
Amen.
phenomenal that
It speaks to his healing and just the way he restores, right?
Yeah, and the fact that his heart is, we teach it is not good that man and woman be alone. So unless you're really called to that, which very few people are, he says, well, I still want you to have fellowship and unity. And like you said, Brad, it's love can continue in a different way, in a different process. So it's not exclusive, mutually exclusive. It's both and, so that's a great thing. So we love you guys. Thank you for sharing that. And Kathy will do another taping and have them do part 2. So that'll be kind of
so
fun.
Everyone will have to join back in next Thursday so that you can hear part 2 of the story.
That's it. So hold on, and we'll just go through the close of this one, and then we'll take a slight break and come back. If you got the time to do a little bit more.
We do.
Oh, great. Okay, well then we'd love to do that. So Kathy will just pick it up again, and their part 2 will be a week later, and we'll be excited to have that. So
absolutely. Thank you for joining us, everyone, and definitely join us again next Thursday to hear part 2 on this. Thanks for everything.
And Kathy, I'll see you on the taping anyway. We'll see you for End Times Friday tomorrow. So
yes, sounds great.
All right. We'll see you guys in a minute.
Thank you for joining us for today's episode of Come and See, your podcast for truth in a world of chaos. Brought to you by All for Jesus Living Waters Ministry. Send us your questions and comments, and tune in tomorrow for more answers to your personal questions about living life in God's truth. Remember, God's will is best and none better. His truth brings peace in this world of chaos.